So, welcome to episode 4 of Explorers of Consciousness. This is Rogier, and I'm here with Monica and Malou, and today we're going to basically continue from last month's episode, in which it was instilled in us the importance of internalizing, of beginning to properly internalize these 585 principles of godhood and why this was important. And so today we're going to continue with that subject, but we're going to continue the subject according to the principle or concept or idea that Almine gave in the last episode of awakening from the dream, which is this notion of a frequency chamber or a frequency vehicle. The principles of pristine humanity that we discussed in the May edition of Explorers in episode 3, they represent one component of this frequency vehicle. And now, in today's episode, we'll discuss, what is a frequency vehicle. I mean, it's a vehicle of expression, but why do we need it, and why are we building one? So those are questions that will be answered. But if you recall from last time, the idea of these principles of pristine humanity, that we said we were internalizing them so that we could have them be like an inner reality present in us, so that when these outer macrocosmic matrices that constitute what Almine calls the grid, these ever bigger cycles of life, death, and ascension, is that when if all of that were to collapse, and that's the idea, that's what we mean when we say we're going to exit the grid, the reality of pristine humanity would have to be established inside, in inner space. And to that end, we were properly internalizing them now, because that never happened in 2013 when they first emerged, due to everything that happened with Almine and the underworld and the whole process that we sped through. Before we go to the frequency chamber, let's just look at the journey that we've been in, because the interesting thing about this notion of a frequency chamber or a frequency vehicle, as Almine illustrated it in Awakening from the Dream, is that it doesn't just explain or describe what we're doing now, like this year, which has, of course, been very much, the theme has been the stages of awakening and the webinars of becoming a master of high magic and mastery of the unfathomable. But it also, it really acts as a kind of cohesive principle, just looking back on the journey that we've been on, because you can understand certainly everything that we've been doing since 2013 with the principles of godhood, the online course, the trilogy, Entering Godhood. You can understand that whole path really in terms of this frequency vehicle that's being built now. And interestingly, you can even go back further, because Almine became aware of the original ones in 2011, and basically everything up until 2011 in her teachings had been about pristine humanity. I mean, she didn't call it that, but retrospectively, it was then all about the role of awakening this pristine humanity. And then in 2011, she became aware of the original ones and their work, And this is also something then, the original ones is also something that explains something that was happening in our classes at the time, because there was a very big divergence created where, or I don't know if that's the right word, but like a divide between basically, on the one hand, the people saying, she's crazy, which is in this story humanity. On the other hand, the original ones who were like, I've been waiting for this all of my life, and it was such a polarity, but it was something that Almine could eventually only understand through this, well, what she became aware of, which was the original ones and their role, and also their role vis-a-vis humanity. So, okay, so just to recap, so we're going to discuss the frequency vehicle and all its facets. Then we're going to look at space and the way in which it changes at the point in which you're in now. And then to close, we'll look at the runes of the unfathomable, which have just been received by Almine, all of them, and they were very difficult. She said, like, each insight will take me like 30 to 45 minutes if I'm lucky. It's like it's very, very difficult to get, and not something that mind can understand. These principles are only something that can be felt. So, but before we do that, before we go to the frequency vehicle, let's look at this journey we've been on. So we were in the stages of dreaming, then we went through resurrection, and then we became aware of this parallel reality of inner space, the cosmic death realms, and then we went into awakening, which awakening happens in the cosmic death realms, just like the dream happens in the life realms. And then we have the ascension realms as well, but this is the journey that we've been on. And you can see this, you can map this basically as a cross consisting of two figure eights, two infinity loops, but one horizontal and one vertical. Although I guess it works better if you just sort of see it as flat and yourself standing in the middle, and then on your left you have dreaming, on your right you have awakening, in front of you you have ascension 1, and behind you you have ascension 2. And all of individuated life has been this cycling back and forth between life, death, and then occasionally ascension, and then ascension realms. Spirit really split itself into two realms to kind of mimic the masculine and feminine of life and death in its own realm. But that's the path that we've been on, and this is what we've always been doing, but at different levels, in ever bigger cycles, like Russian dolls, basically, forever stacked, and it just continues. And this is actually also kind of a depressing thought. It will, like, these matrices will continue forever unless at some point they're exited. And when Almine speaks about exiting the grid, it means that now we are approaching such a jump-off point, so to speak. And to this end, we're building the frequency chamber. Now, before we go to the frequency chamber, let's just first define what an individuation is. There was a post in late May on the diary about sinkholes and fissures and why they're happening now, and basically describing the purpose of the June 9 ceremony to restore the integrity of the Earth's crust, the imbalances being that manifest as sinkholes and fissures, which are all about missing frequencies, and all our work now is really about establishing these missing frequencies. But in that post, you will see the numbers that I'm referring to here. There's a sum or a equation consisting of 585 principles of pristine humanity, 441 principles of godhood, 9 times 96 principles of resurrection, also known as the runes, and then 288 songs of the lands or songs of the earth. Recently, Almine has said that everything is basically alchemy, and that every individuation is an alchemical component. And the point about alchemy is that it's not something that's created, it's already there. The point about potential is not that it's something that's created, it's something that's already there. It's like it's hanging there and it just needs to be accessed and expressed, and this is what alchemy is. And basically the infinite is the alchemist, and its individuations are its alchemical components that it uses to express potential. And every individuation is a different emphasis of these 2,178 tones and frequencies. So that's what every individuation is. Now that you have an idea about that individuation, and by the way, this is also really the first time that we're even getting an inkling of what individuation is and what you as an individuation are, but that's what it is. So going forward in this event, when we speak about individuation, that's basically the definition. It's an alchemical component wielded by the infinite as the master alchemist. So let's look at this idea of vehicles of expression, in order to understand what a frequency vehicle is, why we're building a frequency vehicle, and why we even need it. So in the dream we had 3 vehicles of expression: body, soul, and spirit. And these vehicles of expression were like our incubation chambers, where we were kind of plugged into, and it's what upheld our reality. And in awakening, we also have vehicles of expression, but these are not the same vehicles of expression, and they're basically the 4 components. So godhood principles, pristine humanity principles, the principles of resurrection, and the songs of the land. So it's like you have 4 components. Now we're working on internalizing all of these, not just because they represent our vehicles of expression in awakening, but because they also represent the components with which we are building our frequency chamber. And through internalization, we substantiate these components, and it's like we infuse them with enough strength in order to be able to function as one of the 4 components of our frequency vehicle. So you can look at this frequency vehicle kind of like a triangular pyramid with 3 sides and a base. So in total it has 4 sides. So I guess maybe you call that a tetrahedron, but that's a model you could use, even though that's not its shape, but that's one way you can think about it. It has 4 sides, and each side, 2 sides are frequency-based, 2 sides are light-based. So light-based is principles of godhood, principles of pristine humanity, and then frequency-based components are principles of resurrection and the songs of the lands. Now, why would we need such a vehicle? Why would we need to be building it? We're building it because we're about to be faced with a choice at the end of the 4th stage of awakening, and which tentatively will be happening around July 22nd. I think it still will, but the point is, Almine had said that initially there was very much this sense of a deadline or a due date, before she realized that was one more instance of the tyranny of time, albeit the biggest clock of all, the cosmic orbit. And so she said, we're not going to adhere to that. So we will get to this point whenever it suits us. And how is basically the same as with 2012, where Almine was at the Belgium retreat, and there was this nervousness about what was going to happen. And it's not that the date could be ignored, but it could be pushed back, it could be stretched out, and the way it was done was with this influx of light. And so ultimately the end of 2012 was not on December 21st, but it actually took place on February 14, 2013. And this is illustrating the point where, bring in enough light and I guess frequency as well, but this can be pushed back. So we're doing the same with this cutoff point, if you will. We'll get there when we're ready, because we'll just stretch it according to taste. So that's how it's going. But when we face this point, we have 4 options about where we're going to go. And so I believe we discussed this last time, but I'll just go through them again. So the first one is going back to the dream. First option, that's what we can do. We can go back to the dream. It won't have to be this thing with nightmarish qualities or overtones that many of us remember. It can be something at a higher level, and we could go there with an edge, so to speak. With what we know now, it would be a more enjoyable experience, but still not great. So then the other option is to kind of keep cycling through these stages of awakening, which would be the easier option of the two, but also not really ideal. Then the other option is to go to the ascension realms, and that would definitely not be ideal. And until I spoke with Almine a few days ago, I knew it wasn't ideal, but I didn't necessarily understand why we might deem it less ideal. But why it is because there's such a, it's like stagnation is almost inherent to ascension realms. And so there's a challenge of maintaining self-empowerment. So if you take those aspects together, you're basically entering an environment where you run the risk of basically being stuck in for another few billion years of matrices, just because of the nature of the territory. So definitely not ideal. And then there's the option of exiting the grid altogether. Now, when we say exiting the grid, what does it mean? Well, it means that we say, look, yes, we have all these loops of life and death and Ascension 1 and Ascension 2, but these are imaginary spaces that were imagined by us. And so that said, we can unimagine them. And this is the whole thing. Exiting the grid basically means ceasing to imagine these imaginary spaces, these incubation chambers that we dreamt up of body, soul, and spirits, and life and death and awakening and ascension and all these things. And by the way, it's these vehicles, these incubation chambers of the dream of body, soul, and spirit that have also given us, such heartache and pain. It's because how they were built, how these vehicles were built, they were light-based, and So their space was geometry based, which means that inherent to it is rigid structure and therefore painful separation, i.e. death, but not just death of the soul realm, but each vehicle has its own version of death, and its first objective is to escape this death because it represents the the moving of your center of gravity to the next realm. So in life we seek to escape death, in death we seek to escape death, which is rebirth there, and in ascension we seek to escape death, i.e. falling out of heaven because we weren't able to walk the line. So all of them have their versions of death, but that's what's inherent to vehicles that are light-based and that have a geometry-based space. Keep that idea in mind because we'll return back to it later, because now we're going to create a different kind of space. At any rate, to say we're going to unimagine these vehicles, these imaginary spaces, is not a frivolous, trivial thing at all, because you're basically saying that the bucket in the ocean that had created these artificial divisions is going to dissolve, and the moment that the bucket dissolves, there is nothing there to prevent your individuation from being swallowed up by the ocean. This is why we had those incubation chambers. They weren't comfortable, but it was the thing, just like the egg that gave us a certain perceived safety insofar as it preserved our individuation, and without it, our individuation would just dissolve. And so this is why we're creating a frequency vehicle, because if we exit the grid, we need to have something. We need to have, like the baby turtle that has its shell, we need to, at that point, carry our own home with us. And that's what we're doing with building this frequency vehicle. We're making it so that we have a vehicle that will always travel with us, that will act as its own reference point, and that will preserve our individuation and prevent it from being swallowed up by the wide ocean that we're about to enter. Because Almine gave the analogy of the baby turtle, the way they're born, and it's very beautiful actually if you just Google baby turtle beach and the path, the journey that they have to go through, because their mother buries the eggs in the sand, and then the eggs hatch, then the baby turtles climb out, and then in a kind of, it's a kind of like a trial by fire, but then they have to make it to the ocean, crawl there before the seagulls get them, and then when they're in the ocean, they're safe. But whatever they're doing, they can't stand still. The moment the egg is hatching, they have to make it to the ocean. And that's very appropriate analogy for what we're doing now, because it's like, if we say we're going to exit the grid, it means we're about to enter the wide ocean. And, we're leaving the familiar beaches and shores of life, death, ascension, body, soul, spirit, because where we're going, there is no up and down, left and right. There are no beaches and there are no shores. And as such, we need our own craft. And this craft is this frequency vehicle, something that will sustain and preserve our individuation as we enter the ocean, because once these imaginary spaces are unimagined, all falls away. And by all, I mean these massive macrocosmic structures. Okay, so let's then talk about space and the role of the fragrance alchemy. Because you'll have noticed there's been a lot of activity around the fragrance oils. It isn't this thing where, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that there is a reason for this activity, and I didn't actually understand it either until Almine enlightened me about it a few days ago. But it isn't that this activity is just there because they're being, enhanced or upgraded. What's actually happening is that the nature of the oils is changing. And let me just see if I can pull up the quote here. So this is from Instagram on one day ago, so May 31st, but where Almine says, within the dream, the alchemical oils promote new perception and clear, obsolete perspectives. Within awakening, they awaken frequencies that have been dormant. So what that actually means is that the nature of the oils has changed. They've been changed. Their whole purpose has changed. And even though we speak of light and frequency as if these are separate things, they're not. But for the purposes of discussion, we refer to light and frequency because during the dream, the oils held frequency in their hearts as a potential while they had accessible light, which means that basically they impart a perspective or they deliver insight. So, for example, if you had someone who had, like, say, issues with thyroid, suicidal tendencies, for example, then you would use the oud oil, which is primary component of blend of the gods, and it would impart the perspective that would neutralize and override this suicidal perspective. But the oils don't do that anymore. In awakening, which is where we're now, cosmic death realms, their frequency aspect is emphasized, and it holds the perception in its heart, which means that as you express the frequency of the oil, its perception is released, but the main emphasis now is on the frequency. Now, what's so brilliant about this is when you see how it relates to the frequency vehicle, because the point with this vehicle as such is that as it stands in our discussion now, okay, so we have two frequency components, we have two light components, it's very even right now. But when it's even, that's not good enough for our purposes, really, because really we want something that's frequency based. Now, why do we want something that's frequency based? Well, this revolves around the concept of space. Previously, in our individuation, when we created space, and space we create because if you want to maintain something that can be qualified as a separate individuation, you need the space. But in the vehicles that we built so far, they were basically built with geometry and light, body, soul, and spirit. When you have something that's built from angles and geometry to basically define what is within it, to separate a space, you have something that's extremely rigid and something that will dictate life. It will have in it a kind of a membrane, and this membrane, upon various, let's say, rounds around the block, around these matrices, will become a matrix itself, because it will be collecting debris. So all of that is very inherent to the nature of light-based space. So we already created vehicles like this. It's been our dream of individuation so far, and in the words of Almine, it wasn't that great, because these boundaries are what brought us the beginnings and the endings and the painful separation. So in this building, this frequency vehicle, which with what we now know about space, we really need a new kind of space. And that's why we're now creating a frequency-based space. And how we do it is by infusing, if you will, our vehicle with these oils, because it's these oils that will tip the scales and make it, the frequency component, stronger, which means that we're using frequency to define the space. Because, this is very abstract, but the idea is basically that if you have a frequency somewhere, then that's a unique thing that is not somewhere else. And through this, a space can be maintained. So that principle of frequency-based space is what we're using this time to create a space for our individuation in the frequency vehicle. And all of that is possible because the function of the oil changed once we entered into awakening. And this is why there's been such a flurry of activity around it, of Almine upgrading and working with these oils, and really in doing so changing all the oils on everyone's shelf, because it's like she said, it's like a packet of red dye in the ocean. You can't contain it anywhere. It's like the work that she's doing has been changing the nature of all these oils, and that's why she's been working so hard on it, because it was to conduce the process of the function of these oils changing. Now, to close this off, let's look at one of the components of our vehicle, which is the principles of resurrection. And you may say, well, didn't we already go through resurrection before awakening? And what actually happened there is that we did, but that resurrection was an individual, microcosmic resurrection. It could have been a macrocosmic event initiated from the realms of the dream, from life, but it wasn't. At the time, it was a more of an individual resurrection, something that original ones went through so that humanity could follow, but it wasn't the big resurrection. And the big resurrection happens from the dream, from awakening, where we are now, and that's the macrocosmic resurrection. And so that's why now the eighth deck was received a few, I believe last year, and it's being completed now, and the ninth deck has just been received by Almine. But that's all that's all a function of the macrocosmic resurrection that we're basically entering now, in which life and death, cosmic life and cosmic death realms are basically being collapsed into one, and then dissolving, in also known as R exiting the grid. And in case you're wondering, I'm sure there's a deep story about why it wasn't possible within the dream, or why it didn't happen to have this, to initiate this macrocosmic resurrection from there, and just the microcosmic one. But one reason is that we weren't really aware of the cosmic death realms, and we were not very aware of this realm that we're in now. Whereas now we're in this realm, we're also very aware of the realm of the dream. So it's a much better foundation. Now, these runes, the ninth deck, they're very it's like Almine says you can't really, I mean, you can try, but you can't access these with mind. You can only feel them, and there are all, things in there where I said, for example, you have one where the third one that says the division between outer and inner space is imagined. And I asked Almine, well, so on the one hand we use imaginary spaces, but on the other hand we use separation, and can these really be the same? Because imaginary spaces suggests more of an inner process, whereas separation suggests more something that's imposed from the outside. And she said, the big, massive insight that has to be gotten here is that outer and inner space are the same thing. She says, so we're all very comfortable and familiar with the idea that inner space is uniquely ours, but the realization that now has to come is that our outer space is also uniquely ours, and that there is no difference between the two. And that's really one of the key gifts that this ninth rune deck brings. And something that I just thought was very cool in closing, or at least in closing of my little talk, is this one, number 7. And why I thought it was really quite profound is because it gave me an understanding of manifestation and magic that I never got anywhere else. And actually Almine gave it when she explained what it really meant. And it says, the manifestation of our desires is delayed by the linear time we create by the movement between inner and outer space. So I said, well, what do you mean with movement? And Almine said, well, the movement between inner and outer space delays. How? Because, well, inner and outer are one. And this is an understanding we can really only get where we are now. So let's say you want an apple, or want is probably not, everyone in spirituality probably knows that you're not going to focus on the want, but let's say you're more sophisticated and you say, all right, manifest the apple. The moment this has been, let's say, lightly intended, the moment you start sort of scheming, plotting and planning on how to obtain this apple, you're creating density, which is creating linear time. Like density and linear time are basically are intertwined. The more the cause has an agenda to create or bring about the effect, the more it delays manifestation. The agenda to create, this sort of scheming to the outer, is what is the movement. And I thought that was very more than interesting, because I felt that it gave a deeper level, really through the negative, through understanding what delays manifestation, to get a much clearer sense of really how to approach it. And so Almine said, the one who knows that there is no inner and outer can just say, an apple would be nice, without needing to focus or whatever, and then just go about your day experiencing it joyfully like a child. And suddenly there is your apple. And there is no need to affirm this either, like, oh my goodness, I'm so thankful or whatever, because the whole point is that your understanding is that it's automatic. You understand this to be automatic. So it's an extremely subtle insight, but I've found it very productive to contemplate it. And then, of course, you may say, like me, well, yes, but an apple is kind of a trivial example of manifestation. Surely with something, quote unquote, bigger, would you be more inclined to, what Almine called fan the flames, where you infuse it with your emotion and all that stuff, all that kind of law of attraction stuff. But she said, no, it doesn't matter. The principle is the same. The way in which it was just described about the apple, this is how you manifest. All right. Well, that was my part.
Wow, that was very deep. Very, very deep. And I already got a question right in the middle, and it is, so how is life going to be when it's off the grid? Has Almine got any glimpse on it, or any insight or anything? Or, I bet it's something we cannot grasp with our minds now, but did she say anything about it?
Well, not in anything positively defined, because she said, I think she puts the focus on creating this vehicle, because without it, it can actually be a very fear-promoting experience to suddenly be tossed into the ocean, if you will.
And the other question would be, who says that it's not a different kind of matrix that we are entering when we get off the grid?
Yeah, that's the big question. But all we can say is that in our individuation, we haven't done it wherever it is that we're going, and it's not going to be a function of the same matrix that we've been in forever. That was just kind of, it had different levels, but all those levels were all still a function of the same structure. So yeah, it could be, but whatever it is, it's not something we've done before.
This information is really profound. I am all, sort of tingling, and the image or the metaphor with the little baby turtle, that really hit me, because I can really feel how it's struggling to get out of the egg at first, and then running across the beach in order to get to the ocean. So it's different different from the image that Almine has often used with the little chicken in the egg, that once it hatches, it's just in a bigger, what's that called? The hen yard. What's that called? It's a bigger space. It's a bigger world for it, but it's still sort of enclosed. It's just a bigger space. And so with this metaphor with the baby turtle, it goes into the ocean that has no shores and no beaches. And so I can somehow feel the difference, that there is a difference now, that perhaps we are going to enter into a bigger matrix, but it feels like it is the unfathomable. It's just off the grid. Yeah.
To sort of stick within the metaphor, what we've been in so far from dreaming to awakening is kind of going from the seed cell to the egg, and that the process from awakening and then to the bridge of the unfathomable is really from the egg hatched into the ocean.
Right. May I ask something about the frequency vehicle? Because I actually did write this down while you were talking about, the frequency vehicle, but also how the dream or the life, death, and ascension is consists of geometry. How about the frequency vehicle? Does that not have any geometry? No, fluid geometry. Does it not have any geometry at all?
It has light-based components, but they're not dominant. And what makes frequency dominant, what tips the scales in favor of frequency, is the oils which are now frequency dominant. So it's like the presence of the oils is what makes the vehicle a frequency-based thing. So it's not like there is no light, it's just that it doesn't dominate.
All right. So this frequency vehicle, is that sort of the next one after the High Magician, which is also a vehicle for the awakening stages?
Yeah, well, I was meaning to ask Almine about that, because I think that's just another word for one of these components, principles of godhood, pristine humanity, and principles of resurrection and songs of the land. Like, I'm not quite sure how they relate to these vehicles that Ashish described, the High Magician, but I think they're just different ways to describe the same thing.
Could I just ask one more thing about the manifestation when we're in the awakening stages or when we exit the grid? That it really makes sense what you explained from the rune decks, that the movement between the inner and outer is what creates delay in our manifestation, and that the movement is having, or when you're moving from inner space to outer and you're having an agenda. Is this correct? And then if inner space is feminine, would you say that sort of grounding yourself or expressing from inner space, or this is where we're based right now, is more like, allowing and receiving and just, trusting and surrendering into whatever it is? And thus, we manifest quicker. That's what I'm asking, because then we don't have an agenda.
I don't know that I can really pretend to understand it yet, but I think it has something to do with the paradox of kind of just accepting that it's already there, but also not being invested in it at the same time, which of course is kind of a challenge. But
I would also like to add something about this, because I find it's very interesting, this rune number 7 about the manifestation. Because when we look at the New Age esoteric things, it's very popular right now to like all these words like law of attraction and imagining things, and it's really like people seem to love it, and it's not so interesting to have these runes now, because they show again that the work we are doing is again a step further, like somehow turning it around. What is common knowledge now? Do you know what I mean by this?
Yeah, well, it's been kind of the rage for a while now, right? But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just that idea of manifestation is just kind of something that we all have to go through, but it's clear now that it's not the there are let's just say superior forms. I guess it just belongs to certain levels of evolution to sort of be approaching it like that.
I have actually noticed on several occasions that things show up in my life or in my environment that I don't even think about it, or it could be something I have just mentioned to someone, and then there it is. It's been rather odd a few times. I said, wow, that's incredible. I mean, it can be basic things, like, for example, I was talking with my friend about emoticons, smileys, that oh, how annoying, I can't do it on my PC. And we were just talking about it. And then a few minutes later, I go back to my computer and there's what's that called? In English, a tab. There was a tab open that I hadn't seen before with, with a page where how to, copy emoticons or smileys into text. And I didn't open it, I didn't, it just showed up on my screen. And there have been many incidences like that. And so that's sort of very instant. So that was fun. And there has been other examples that are more sort of esoteric or more subtle, but, insights and things that I'm getting quicker. So I feel it's on many levels. It's on practical levels, like an Apple or, help on the PC or whatever, family, and on a spiritual level. So yeah, for me, it's I can definitely feel the change.
Actually, can you just give me one moment? I'd like to just give me a moment, okay?
Hello?
You hear me?
Yes, I am here and I can hear you.
Okay, well, you had offered to do a little closing or just sort of join at the end, so of course I had to take this opportunity.
I am delighted to. All right, can I go ahead? There is something I wanted to mention.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So, my beloved light family, firstly, I am overjoyed to be speaking to you. It's a very nice, glad expectation that's been fulfilled. I wanted to just give you a little bit of information of something that you may be experiencing in your life. I have not one person in my environment, both our support team, myself, and my family members, both immediate and distant, like my grown-up children, that are not in complete crunch time. Now, that means that there is such an overwhelming number of demands made on all of us at this time that one can easily describe it as being overloaded. The first thing to do is to understand why this is happening. The second thing to do is to remind ourselves that it is not forever. Looking at the cosmic time map, I would analyze that this ends the end of July. This complete feeling of this is more than I can handle. And then the fourth thing to do is to understand how to cope with it. So let's start with why is this happening? Well, my precious ones, we are, as you know, getting ready in a very large way to dissolve these massive matrices of dreaming and awakening and all the other ascension ones we haven't even been in as cosmoses. These are getting ready to dissolve. They have been our playpen. They have been the room in which the playpen has been in. We have been in an infantile state exploring individuation. We are getting ready to, for the first time, grow up enough to move away from our nursery, or the chicken is about to come out of the incubation chamber of his egg. So, several things are leading to this. We'll just call it overload. But overload is an attitude, not a number of things coming at you. So, but we'll call it overload for want of a better word. This overload creates the squeezing, the birth canal and the uterus squeezing for the baby to come out, its birth pains, out of the vagina and be birthed into a whole other reality that is not even a reality. It is the vastness of their own being, the vastness of the wild world. Wide world is what the little chick experiences. Can you imagine? When all is known is the interior of his egg, that's us. It requires the squeezing. It requires the effort that produces the impetus of, I want to leave this. But there is a second reason for this. Certain loose ends have to be tied up in these old realities we've been in of awakening and dreaming and parallel universes and all these structured matrices. And one of them has to do with the equivalent of what is the acupressure or acupuncture point 2 finger widths above your navel. There is a very important acupuncture point, and it played a major role when you went from the stages of dreaming into the stages of awakening. But now we are actually working on the same spot at a higher level. You see, overwhelm comes from a blocked point above the navel. That acupuncture point, when it is blocked, we have feelings of, I can't cope with this, no more. Look at everything I have to do. Look at everything I'm required to do. Look at everything I have done. It's a matter of perspective. That perspective becomes flawed, forgetting that there's only the moment when the acupuncture point above the navel is blocked. Well, our world is in overload. The planet herself is saying, how much more are you going to dump on me? How much more leaching of the land are you going to do? How many more things are you going to come up with that I have to overcome? You know, just a little example of the Earth's constant pillaging that's being done. As you may know by now, I have received a very, very welcome product, which is a tool to use to restore damage that has been done to our frequencies, making holes in the frequencies, which in turn makes holes in the earth. This has been done by the electromagnetic frequencies. This product repairs those. It repairs the damage of electromagnetic frequencies. It is something I have been waiting for. But about 2 years ago, I was approached and offered what would business-wise be a good deal on Dead Sea salts from the Dead Sea. Well, the earth immediately said, no. All that you do must be in harmony with all life. It must benefit all life. The Dead Sea salts are hurting me. The harvesting of those is pillaging me. It is disturbing everything. In fact, what I realized is that the heavy salt content in the Dead Sea is responsible for absorbing the negative emotions of the Middle East so that they don't go into a full-fledged war. It gets all those negative emotions, like salt, cleans. It purifies emotions. So the earth also is an overload, and humanity is an overload of information, an overload of electromagnetic frequencies, an overload of sound. It's pollution. There's never a quiet moment in many places on Earth. The overload of the planet and her people is now the next thing we are dealing with. And in December, we dealt with our personal feelings of overload during the 2 week-long retreats that we held in December for this to clear this point above the navel and also then to eliminate those overload feelings. Now, bigger than ever, we are doing this on behalf of the planet and her people. So the overload that we are experiencing, it is imperative that we deal with it masterfully. And so we will analyze how to do that. because it's by proxy for the billions that walk this earth. And that must be cleared, because it will create an umbilical cord, so to speak, around the navel to these old matrices. And when we evolve and dissolve them, it will call them back. So this has to be cleared. And so that is why we are all in this overwhelming demands on us period in our life. Let's see, as masters and gods and the absolute saviors of mankind, how to cope with this. Beloved ones, it got so hectic. The demands of the oils are a divine service, but hours and hours and hours of my week go there. And then my immediate family members are in complete overload with their college work. It's more than I could have imagined when I went through college, and I never experienced anything like this. And so, I'm also overloaded with just household chores that they can't do. And then all this increased flourishing, productivity, the pressure, if we allow it to be, of doing things within certain time frames, all of this is so severe for us, and I'm sure it is for you, because we're all doing this together, that my support team for the Fragrance Alchemy shop have put a sign up in our little oil fulfillment center. How do I eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's something I told them to remember, and they've put it up there to remember that they don't have to live the whole day at once, only one moment at a time. And beloved ones, we will not design something that we are not equipped to handle. We are. We just must learn what to do with overwhelm so that the rest of the world can know what to do with overwhelm. This overwhelm is a sacred challenge. It's a calling. It is not just an inconvenience. Every time we fulfill our covenant with the infinite to be the way showers, great flourishing gifts of peace, gifts of power are ours as a reward. Now, we're beyond the law of compensation. The reward should be instantaneous. So, dearest ones, what do you do with this? First of all, please make a note to yourself. Overwhelm is an attitude. It is not a number of demands. Overwhelm is an attitude, and an attitude is a choice. I can therefore choose to masterfully use this as an opportunity to live in the moment until the moment is all there is. And suddenly you are in timelessness, in which a moment can accomplish a week of work. Timelessness brings that gift. This is your opportunity. Do not look back or forward. There is no back and forward. The past and the future is but a layer, an aspect, a nuance of the moment. That's all we have, is the one eternal moment of existence. So be disciplined. My loves, if this was easy, anyone could do it. They can't. These are the things you, as the highest consciousness beings in the entire cosmos, have come here to do. So, you don't look at all the work that you've done today. You don't look at all the work that you have to do by August the 1st or July the 1st or whatever. You don't look at that. You sit down, You organize yourself into a to-do list, and you leave room because more details will fill in on your to-do list. Like, okay, to-do list says, do grocery shopping by Friday. I need salt, I need sugar. Okay, this is in the cupboard, so I don't need that. Make a little list, that's fine. Add that in during the week. But you make your list. Is it Friday? No. So today is not the day that you have to go to that store. So you take time to organize your day, your week, but then you surrender to the moment. And you surrender, you know a certain amount of things must be done, but they're over here in cyberspace. Right now, this is what you must do. And that becomes your world. You have to write a letter, that becomes your eternity. That's all you see. With complete focus to the moment, you live in a state of awareness. Beloved ones, if we are not pressured, how can we birth ourselves into truly living timelessness? Time is the prison bars of these matrices. We have to. Otherwise, we can go round and round that fishbowl for a few billion years more. But it's our great opportunity to masterfully be with full attention in the moment. Do what is before you. When that moment is complete and that task is complete, beautiful. What does the next moment require of me? That's all there is. What I've just completed, gone. This is all that there is. So, beloved ones, please live this. It is our gift. It is our gift to the planet. It is the gift to us to actually prod ourselves to enter timelessness with full attention to the now. Don't choose overwhelm. Trust that the infinite one that masterfully governs itself as the universe can absolutely facilitate that what you are doing, you have the capability of doing, and that it will unfold with grace if you live your highest truth, which is eating the elephant one moment at a time. I want to thank you, holy ones of this planet, for your presence here. It is overwhelming to me to look at you. You are so beautiful and so holy, and with the deepest reverence, I thank you for being my travel companions on this endless journey that we will discover is no journey at all. Much love to you always. The earth is blessed through your presence.